Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong not only marked mankind's first footsteps on the moon, he marked a turning point in the history of the United States. It all began 22 years earlier in 1947 in the aftermath of World War II. Tensions between Russia and the United States were rising. The Cold War was a sustained state of political and military tension between the United States and their NATO allies and the USSR and their Warsaw Pact allies. Although there was no large-scale violence between the two sides, the Cold War soon turned into a race of military strength and government power which soon extended beyond the planet into what became the space race. On October 4th, 1957, Russia launched the first artificial Earth satellite, Sputnik 1. It orbited 359 miles above the Earth's surface at 4.971 miles per second. It completed 1,350 orbits in 92 days. Millions of people around the world watched it fly overhead at night and tuned into their radios to listen to the beep heard round the world, which the satellite produced for the duration of its flight. The US government began to worry that if Russians continued to achieve in space, they would soon be capable of dropping nuclear bombs from satellite, or even turning the moon into a military base. German engineers and scientists who surrendered to the American troops during World War II were brought to Fort Bliss, Texas, where once the war ended, they were set up to help bring a space race victory to the United States. One of these scientists was Wernher von Braun, a German rocket engineer and space architect. With his help, America began work on their space program, and on January 31st, 1958, the Explorer 1 was launched. But the Americans were still feeling pressure. On May 25, 1961, President John F. Kennedy promised a moon landing before the decade was over.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
The space race intensified. Kennedy told NASA Administrator James Webb,
"You see, whether we like it or not, it intends a race. If we get second to the moon, it's nice, but it's like being second anytime. Everything that we do ought to really be tied into getting onto the moon and ahead of the Russians."
By the time the Apollo project started in 1963, American citizens were ready to see one of their own land on the moon, as JFK had promised. But they were met with tragedy. During a pre-flight test for Apollo 1 on January 27, 1967, astronauts Virgil Grissom, Edward White, and Roger Chaffee lost their lives when a fire swept through the command module. But resilient as ever, the scientists continued to work on and improve the program. Apollo missions 7, 8, 9, and 10 were all accomplished missions without any disasters. Apollo 8 is remembered as the first trans-Earth injection in December of 1968. On Christmas Eve, the astronauts gave a live televised broadcast to those back on Earth of a reading from the book of Genesis in the Bible. They also took the famous picture of the Earthrise over the horizon of the moon.
The crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light."
Less than a year later, on July 19, 1969, Apollo 11 landed on the moon, completing the task that Kennedy had promised 8 years previous. The prime mission objective of Apollo 11 is stated simply: perform a manned lunar landing and return. The crew consisted of Neil Armstrong, Edwin Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. Neil Armstrong was the commander, Buzz Aldrin the lunar module pilot, and Michael Collins was the command module pilot. The Apollo 11 spacecraft consisted of the command module Columbia, which would continue to orbit the moon, while the lunar module Eagle would land on the moon's surface with Armstrong and Aldrin on board.
To see if the astronauts would be successful, an estimated 600 million people, 1/5 of the world's population, watched and listened to the mission on live broadcast. ABC, CBS, and NBC spent collectively $11 to $12 million on coverage, which lasted from Sunday morning until Monday evening.
12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
At the Kennedy Space Center on July 16, 1969 at 9:32 a.m. in Cape Canaveral, Florida, Apollo 11 was launched and entered into Earth's orbit 12 minutes later. After taking 1.5 orbits around Earth, the spacecraft aligned with its flight path to the Moon. On July 19th at 17:21:50 UTC, Coordinated Universal Time, Apollo 11 passed behind the Moon, fired its engine, and entered into lunar orbit. Taking 30 orbits around the Moon, the crew saw their landing site, an area called the Sea of Tranquility. The next day, the lunar module, Eagle, separated from the Columbia, leaving Collins alone in his command module. As the Eagle began its descent, Armstrong and Aldrin realized their landing course was miles west of their target landing point, and they were running out of fuel. However, Armstrong remained calm, and he and Aldrin were able to land on the Moon.
5.5 down. 9 forward. Good. 1020 feet. 100 feet, 3.5. Very smooth touchdown.
Here, Armstrong reports that the Eagle has landed. After they rested for a while, the time arrived for Armstrong and Aldrin to complete the task President Kennedy had promised 8 years before. After locking their helmets into place, the two men were ready to make history. At 2:39 UTC on Monday, July 21, 1969, Armstrong opened the lunar module hatch and 10 minutes later began his descent to the lunar surface. He soon activated the TV camera, and at 2:56:15 UTC, Neil Armstrong set his left foot on the surface of the Moon and declared arguably the most famous words in American history.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Buzz Aldrin joined him on the Moon's surface, and the two collected rock and soil samples to be taken back to Earth for analysis. The astronauts planted a specially designed U.S. flag on the lunar surface in clear view of the TV camera. Later, President Richard Nixon spoke to them through a telephone radio transmission.
Nixon called this the most historic phone call ever made from the White House. The duo spent 21 hours 36 minutes on the Moon's surface before they had to return to Collins in the Columbia. Along with their backpacks, an American flag, and half of the Apollo 11 moon landing module, Armstrong and Aldrin left some sentimental items on the surface of the Moon. This included a patch from the never-launched Apollo 1 mission, medals commemorating pioneering Soviet cosmonauts Vladimir Komarov and Yuri Gagarin, who had died in flight in 1967 and 1968, goodwill messages from 73 world leaders, and a small gold pin shaped like an olive branch, a symbol of peace. On the leg of the Eagle, they also left a plaque signed by President Nixon and the crew. The plaque bears a map of Earth and an inscription which reads, "Here, men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the Moon. July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind."
With that, the two men returned to the Columbia. Their trip back home went rather smoothly. After a flight of 195 hours, 18 minutes, and 35 seconds, about 8 days, Apollo 11 splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, 13 miles from the recovery ship, the USS Hornet. The moon landing marks a moment when human courage and ingenuity showed the world what they could do if they worked together toward a common goal. It brought together people from all spectrums of science, the military, engineering, technology, and industry. The Russians, the Germans, and the Americans had been working on space travel for decades. And finally, one of them had succeeded in stepping on the bright white sphere in the stars.
The Apollo mission was momentous in determining the politics of the United States and foreign relations with Russia. America realized that, in order to secure its place as a global leader, the Apollo 11 mission must succeed. The launch of Sputnik inspired increased federal and industrial spending in the educational fields of science, technology, engineering, and math, and sparked the space race. The rise of the space age transformed the Cold War into a competition where national and international prestige, as well as technological progress, innovation, and modernization were essential political goals. The lunar landing of Apollo 11 demonstrated both the economic and technological prowess of the United States and led to substantial political benefits. It met the vital U.S. political needs relating to the Cold War by demonstrating the nation's capabilities and dominance over the Soviet Union.
The international image of the U.S. was, if only for an instant, the most pristine it had ever been. President Johnson explained, "One can predict with confidence that failure to master space means being second best in the crucial arena of our Cold War world. In the eyes of the world, first in space means first. Second in space is second in everything." The success of Apollo 11 mesmerized the world, united generations, connected diverse cultures, and for a moment brought peace to a divided world. It was an event of international importance that touched countless lives on an intensely personal level.
Apollo 11 served as a unifying force in the fragmented disarray that plagued the United States. During the year of the Santa Barbara oil spill, the Stonewall riots in New York City, the Vietnam War, anti-war protests often violently dispersed by the National Guard, the My Lai massacre, civil rights demonstrations, and arms race escalations, the lunar landing of Apollo 11 gave temporary peace to a society that desperately needed it. By winning the space race with the Soviet Union, Apollo gave a boost to the nation's prestige in the world and, for many Americans, a heightened sense of national pride. The astounding planning and coordination among scientists and engineers of the Apollo program, which had a workforce totaling about 350,000 people from around the world, has yet to be duplicated. The lunar landing inspired a generation to continue work in space and technology. The uncharted landscape of the moon was a reflection of the American mystery unfolding on Earth and gave the American people hope. If the U.S. could put a man on the moon, the mountains of war and civil rights could also be scaled.
Apollo programs also had an impact on American views of the environment. The testimony and photographs of the men who made Apollo voyages revealed Earth as a precious oasis of life in a vast and hostile universe, a world to be cherished and protected. Understanding these lessons is often at odds with the short-term focus of our day-to-day culture. As Bill Anderson puts it, "We came all this way to explore the moon, and the most important thing is that we discovered the Earth."
Apollo 11 had a profound effect not only in the United States but also the entire world. It demonstrated the true capability of mankind and is one of the few events that was felt worldwide. By winning the space race, the lunar landing secured the United States' place ahead of the Soviet Union and among the most elite nations on the planet, an essential priority during the Cold War. The program instilled a sense of national pride, hope, and peace in the American people during a time of extreme adversity.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Well done, Gru. Rather impressive.
Now, the rest of the plan is simple. I fly to the moon. I shrink the moon. I grab the moon. I sit on the toilet. What?
Sorry. Excuse me for just one second.